bonjour.
So good morning to all of you. I'm delighted to be with you again on Sunday morning, third day of the Rencontre du Cercle des Économistes in Aix-en-Provence. We'll be talking about a topic, and we were surprised when this topic was on offer. To invest in the future. Why do we invest? Because we need to invest in the future. Then I pondered over to invest in the future for whom, what for, what's the point, and how can we invest in the future? And what about the funding? There are two major types of urgencies. Climate emergency. Of course, we'll have to invest in the planet. Otherwise, we will burn, and if we don't invest, there won't be any future. Of course, you need to talk about the French news. Elisabeth Borne, the Prime Minister, is not with us. 7 billion euros worth of investment in the climate project. Who will benefit this bonanza? So this is one of the questions or issues that we can raise to invest in the future. When I thought about it, I said we need to invest in human beings, in skills, competences, in jobs, in training programs. Have a look at what the country went through last week. So when there's work, we need to invest in training, education in schools. These are the two major themes that we'll be touching upon. We have a panel of speakers with us. Fabien Versaveux, who is with me, the CEO of Rakuten France, with Nicolas Dufourcq, the Chief Executive Officer of BPI France, Thierry Deo, Founding Partner, Chief Executive Officer, Meridium, a long-term investment fund, and Arnaud Aimé, the General Manager at SIA Partners. He's been at the helm of SIA Partners in France. So at the Cercle des Économistes, we have a local economist, Céline Gimet, at Sciences Po X, and she will lay the foundations of the debate. Thanks a lot, Philippe. So I will give you some contextual elements so that we can kickstart our discussions in the light of the challenges linked to carbon-free production modes, adaptation to climate change, more social justice. We need to invest in the future, and that's a huge task. It's a shock in terms of supplies and offers, and this should span all sectors of the economy. It's like the fourth industrial revolution based on the opportunities brought about by a digital economy with a positive impact on the environment and societies. Some innovation waves will be beefed up, and there will be more productivity gains and hence more long-term growth. But what does it mean, investing in the future? The idea behind that is to embed profitability considerations, environmental externalities, social externalities linked to long-term investments. If you consider this rationale, investing in the future, it's like a philanthropy. The impact will prevail over performance, but in general terms, socially responsible investments do encompass fairer, long-term, sustainable considerations versus the traditional long-term consequences. Who are the stakeholders? Who are the players? As I said, there's a need to invest massively, so all stakeholders and players are concerned, whether public or private. States, first, they have to lay out the framework for innovation. They need to lay the cornerstones for infrastructures, human capital. The objective is to create new technological sectors, but at the same time, they need to support the funding mechanisms for SMEs, very small companies, startups with a high growth potential and with a high risk pattern. So on this front, initiatives abound. The investment program for the future in France, but it has to be bolstered. But you have the private players, stakeholders, they have a key role to shoulder. the financial players, banks, funds, and all the rest of it, they need to urge companies to guide their investments towards projects that are fairer, more sustainable. These investments take into account the risks connected with the incoming challenges. This situation will generate more profit. If you look at the financial performance of a traditional investment and an investment in the future, they're almost similar, but investing in the future will be conducive to an extra financial performance, and it should be more attractive. Nevertheless, when you look at the figures, investing in the future is a very heterogeneous process, especially the ESG-related investments managed by professional funds in Europe and in the United States, and they only account for 30% of the overall assets. Why is it the case? Why is it so? Why there's a lack of incentives, and how can we square the circle? So you need to consider the quality of impact. How can we gauge the extra financial performance of an investment in the future? And if you consider these measures, they are a bit murky. Hence, you have ESS washing, greenwashing practices that are coming to the fore. So how can we allot capital better? It's important to pinpoint quantifiable objectives, realistic, taking into account common patterns. The goals of sustainable development engineered by the United Nations, but we need to beef up the institutional, regulatory, tax frameworks in order to make sure that people invest in the future. You have the IRA in the United States. In Europe, you have the carbon tax at the borders. But anyway, it's important to focus on a model based on universal taxonomy, along the lines of the European taxonomy that is in existence in Europe. The objective is to be more transparent, hence more incentives to invest in the future. Thank you for setting the background to our discussions. I'm not quite sure that we'll be able to touch upon all of these topics. Thierry Déaut, investing in the future when you are a long-term infrastructure fund, I think that what Céline said is quite relevant. Do you think that the French framework is propitious to investments in the future? You have BPI France, we have the Bank of Territories, the Bank of Regions, you have the public actions, you have Europe with some green funds that are being made available, you have the European Investment Bank, you are a private fund. In terms of investing in the planet, how do you choose the investments? How do you establish some priorities? How do you make sure that you need to start launching the process? We have 10 years ahead of us to replace hundreds of years of carbon-based production, and we need to move to a carbon-free world. Thanks a lot for raising this question, and thanks a lot for the invitation. There is a threefold approach. We need to invest in the future for financial yields, to invest for extra financial yields. Having an impact on the planet is also very important. So when it comes to impact, you need to have a long-term view. When you invest at a given point in time, you need to focus on the long haul. So this threefold approach is fundamental. So in France, we have all it takes in terms of public money being mobilized. So I think that we can invest, but when it comes to allotting savings, so the financial players and the industrial players who can invest should focus on the long term. Any investment-related action should take into account climate change. but any investment action should be based on adaptation. We are already immersed in climate change, and I think that people have realized adaptation is not easy. It means that today we need to think about different scenarios, +2, +3, +4 degrees, even though we reach the 1.5 degree target in some areas in the world. In some pockets of the world, the temperatures will be higher than that. So we need to preempt the situation. We need to anticipate our investments. And for the industries, there are lots of challenges to take up. We have to invest in the industries of the future, in the green industries, in order to make sure that transition is forthcoming. This is one of the chapters of the green industry agenda, but there's another section that is important. I mean, industry, the current industry should be carbon-free. When you look at the figures, 11,000 sites in Europe producing 50% of emissions, and they are within the quotas. So this is easy, but you have some competition-based tensions, because if you consider those plants, I mean, those plants and factories need to remain competitive. There are some tensions regarding subsidies. We've talked about the American IRA, but Europe has also launched some investment plans. You have a Green Deal, and the Green Deal will underpin those industries, but our storytelling is not good, not as good as the Americans. So we've said 300 billion, 400 billion, 600 billion, and for the Americans it's 300 billion. And I think that we don't think about how all these aspects are integrated into the economy. So we need to turn words into deeds, and that's not easy. Nicolas Dufour, you are well known because you published a novel on reindustrialization, and you delivered a message. So France was suffering from a lack of industrialization. So there's a Green Deal, a draft Green Deal at the French Parliament, but there's still a long way to go. So allow me to flag up this question, better late than never. So the interest rates were nil. And in the near future, the interest rates will be worth 5 or 6%. So can we catch up at a time when the interest rates are very high? As Thierry pointed out, there is money, even though the interest rates are high, but we might be lagging behind because the Americans are ahead. So for the French companies, they will say, am I going to invest in the United States thanks to the IRA, or am I going to invest in Europe? Thanks a lot for this question. So following your question, I need to dispel some fears and some doubts. So the worst for us is to become analysts of powerlessness. So interest rates are high, something that we'll have to live with in many countries of the world, and for many years you have some inflationary pressures. And remember what Cécile said, you cannot change a productive global fabric. There are lots of problems, access to resources, and of course inflation is a reality. So for the European Central Bank, inflation is a key topic. There's another topic, the target yield being requested by the private investors. BPI will be investing 35 billion in the next 5 years, and in climate 35 billion, 12 billion in health care, but it's possible if there are some private counterparts, and have to own up to the facts that regarding reindustrialization, the new industrial facilities that are carbon-free using disruptive technologies, the future is uncertain. it's a hit-and-miss affair because every day you have a new piece of technological information that will dispute the choices that have been made. So basically, it's a very hazy environment. So the private counterparts are not easy to get by. So allow me to make an appeal. We'll need private money, so as Thierry pointed out. For public money, lots of efforts have been made. Public subsidies are quite high because Europe grants 450 billion euros worth of state aids. And there's a blueprint in Europe, the matching process, whereby a European company, as soon as it can prove that the Americans have come up with a subsidy, they can get the same type of subsidy. Of course, you need to take into account the European regulations in terms of state aids, but what about the matching process with China? So what China does is a bit opaque. You have one IRA per Chinese region and per year. So if you have a look at the verticals of the economy, there are some Chinese companies that are subsidized to the tune of 80 or 90%. So we need to prove that. And of course, European companies should be in a position to be competitive. I'm not worried vis-à-vis the United States. I'm rather worried with the level playing field with China, especially if you consider the new economy towards electricity production. And I can tell you that China is a step ahead. So you need to consider the TRI, the yield rate, the industrial yield rate. That is important to take into account. And I can tell you that inflation has risen. So people were humble. So when you had an industrial rate was 15%, it was a sign that investors thought that this 15%, 20% industrial return rate was not too bad, but we won't get the same yields as it was the case in the past. So Arnaud, Aimé, so all of these sectors have to embark upon industrial revolution, mobility, transports, transit systems in the next 10 years. If we want to achieve the climate goals, some investments will have to be made. So at SI Partners, what is your strategy? You are talking to different customers. Maybe customers will say, okay, we're going to give up. Good morning to all of you. Things are going well, by the way. And when we talk to companies, corporations we are working with, there's a distinction to be made. You invest in the future, you invest in incremental innovations or disruptive innovations. So the incremental innovations, the companies, can do that, especially with the subsidies, the research tax credit. So with disruptive patterns, you should have a non-diluted investment, and you have to consider the public procurement. And we don't have enough public orders in France. So BPI has been working hard over the past 10 years. And very few people were optimistic in the past. So France cannot invest across all the spectrum. You need to pick up the disruptive innovations. Moreover, it's important not to sprinkle your innovation strategy, and you have to make sure that these technologies are rolled out. And that's where the shoe pinches. Basically, you have some administrative tedious processes. There are lots of absurd standards. So welcome to GMOs, but you need to inform the corporate leaders. They should be made aware of disruptive innovations. We need to optimize research and development. And for the country, we need to establish some priorities. They should be rolled out very swiftly. In Korea, for example, they said, we don't want to be only in the race, but we want to be the leaders in 6G telecommunications, and they pulled out all the stops. But in France, it's very difficult for us to deploy the 5G systems.
So we are going to have to save scientific education here in France. There's a lot of work to be done. Yes, I'm sure we'll be talking about that in our second half. Fabien Versavo, you work for Rakuten, a tech company, mainly tech. Perhaps you could give us a few inroads here. We've talked about the climate, but behind the future, of course, is the future of research. So this disruptive innovation for a business it means taking risks, of course. You're not sure it's going to work. So how is it going to be deployed? And is that not the missing link in the future of the planet? Absolutely, yes. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Indeed, innovating for the future is an act of faith. It's an act of faith on the part of society, company leaders. We really need to be optimistic. If you know the language Japanese, the word Rakuten means optimism. So we are the first digital tech company in Japan. We're present in 50 or so countries. And this value of optimism is absolutely basic, fundamental, and it drives us every day. As has already been mentioned, investing in the future or for the future means not only creating economic value, obviously that's essential, but going beyond that and rising to social challenges, environmental challenges, and doing it in an inclusive manner. So to answer your question, I would like first of all to share 3 opportunities that have come to my mind. The first point is a wonderful opportunity. After a period that I would describe as the teen years, digital technologies, artificial intelligence, new connectivities, as have just been mentioned, the cloud, connected objects, and all the rest of it. Well, these technologies are entering into a phase of maturity and are now able to impact the deeper layers of society, the deep layers of the economy. Optimizing energy consumption, protecting the environment, decarbonizing. So these are answers to the pyramid of ages and demographics going down, which is the case all over the world. And that is going to increase, or rather be accentuated. So from that phase where technology was used to connect and create social platforms and e-commerce platforms to digitize financial transactions, now we're shifting to a phase where I believe technology, and I was talking about those deep layers a minute ago, technology will become, AI will become the backbone of society, of the way we are reinventing economics. Just to dwell on that term platform, yes, we are in an age of the platform. There are new technologies that are the foundation on which we can construct economic performance, which combines which includes respect for the environment. So in Europe, as has already been said this morning, in Europe we have to speed up in terms of disruptive innovations, deep tech. We know that we have to learn lessons along the way, and 15 to 25% of European deep techs are purchased by American companies, and it's a one-way street. These are the figures that I have at my disposal. So there really is a big challenge here. So we need to root them in Europe so that they can grow and be nurtured in Europe. The second message is that We cannot make up for lost time in some innovation cycles by just placing loads of money on the table. You may be familiar with MSC, the leading microprocessor company in Taiwan. If we want to have a TSMC in Europe, they're exactly the same thing. You can throw all the money at it you like, it will not work. In my mind, investing for the future means fostering these disruptive innovations, identifying the new elements which are going to be in the value chain in the future, and then specializing the European Union in those critical links in that chain and give us a position, an equal with America or China when we are negotiating. And a third point for investing in the future, which is essential to me, is to invest in partnership with the ecosystems, not investing in technologies that want to disrupt. When I've been to Asia, particularly Japan, I've seen there's a wonderful combination there of an innovation culture in engineering with respect for the long term and equilibrium. In Japan particularly, digital technologies are not there to disrupt, they're not there to hack. Entrepreneurs are not obsessed with substituting their business for something which already exists. What they want to do is to be useful to society. They want to enable the country, the citizens, to adapt to new challenges. One of the main challenges in Japan is town planning and the aging of the population. And in those two areas, robotics. You mentioned South Korea a second ago. Rakuten is the third mobile phone operator in Japan, the third biggest. We launched that activity 3 years ago. We deployed it in record-breaking time. And I mentioned TSMC earlier on, and if we want to create the identical network, well, we gambled on innovation, and we deployed the first network in the world based on open standards, and it's based on the cloud. So you remove 80% of your hardware of a telecoms network, and you transfer all administration, intelligent operational functions into data centers. There are 3,000 data centers scattered across the country, and they are operated by AI. So we take control of the value chain. Well, thank you very much for those explanations. I'm listening to you with fascination here, but there's one word which you did not mention, or no one has mentioned since the beginning. Let's throw it out there to spice up the debate, and this is sovereignty. So perhaps Nicolas or Thierry, perhaps you want to talk about sovereignty. We are being asked to tip into this all-electric world. Perhaps we're not going to be allowed to have gas heaters anymore. We've got heat pumps. We're being asked to adopt solar technology, for example. So how can you move towards a gigafactory? There's one just in Marseille. The first stone has not been laid. But in 2028, perhaps, if it all works, we will have a factory that is creating photovoltaic batteries. Well, they're mainly France, but they are made in France, that's for sure. So, Thierry, Nicolas, so perhaps we haven't got every advantage on our side. It is a wonderful opportunity, of course. But the others are all ready before we are. We've talked about electric cars. I'm not talking about electric cars here. We discussed that yesterday. And I don't think that which car do I choose? Is it a petrol car or is it a battery car? I don't know if the country's going to have enough raw materials to see that transformation through. Yes, the Asian countries demonstrating the path towards sovereignty. They were not there before, but what's preventing us from doing the same thing? Let's take a look in the mirror and say, yes, it's hard to tell yourself this bitter truth, but we have to say, I am an emerging country. So you're saying France is an emerging country? In terms of technology of the future? Not all of them, but those that you've mentioned, photovoltaic, we are an emerging country, batteries, we're an emerging country. We're lagging behind China in relation to China on many aspects. We are an emerging country. So if we need to invest, they have the transfer of technologies as they used to do to us in the past. And that is, in fact, what we're doing, because when we have these gigafactories for ACC, which is a subsidiary of Stellantis, and Total in Angoulême, and now in Douvrin, all of the machines are Chinese. The instructions for using the machines are in Chinese. So we have a load of Chinese operators for those machines. And gradually we're learning. And that's the way China started with German machines and the instructions in the German language. So we're just going to copy them as they copied us in the past. We have to have the mentality of an emerging country. So the Chinese have grasped this, of course. Let's be clear about this. I respect the youngsters, the young entrepreneurs in China who we heard from yesterday in the afternoon and the evening. They are amazing entrepreneurs. They're technology literate, they're joyous, and they're optimistic. They're real good fun. And they are supported by their government, and they are certainly at the top of their game. They have understood that if photovoltaic panels were built here in Europe, then Europe would not want to rely on China. So they're already trying to find out how they can cooperate with us to be included in the future game plan. So China is exporting a lot, and things are changeable, malleable, and no battle is lost ahead of time. And there are many things, many areas where it's useless to try and mobilize your capital. We don't need to do that. We do not need certain things. What if we lose Taiwan? Well, there's a factory which is going to be created in Japan, one in the States. Samsung is also doing the same thing. So the geopolitics are going to be different in the future than today. Yes, the world is absolutely tragic. It's a tragedy. So Thierry, Deo, are we an emerging country? Are we able to catch up? If we want to make this ecological transition with things that are made in Europe or France, then we're going to have to just roll up our sleeves and get on with these gigafactories. Well, in France, it's really important because we are an emerging country, but in Europe, which is not emerging. So when we're talking about sovereignty, you have to think of two circles. Let's not just be navel-gazing here. Let's think about Europe. We're not always the navel of Europe, because the French imagine that they are the center of the whole world, if not just Europe. But here we've got some very good examples. Let's speak in concrete terms. If we see the ecosystems that are being created in Dunkirk with the gigafactories there, there's a factory, there's a technology, but there's all the things which go around that. A green industry cannot survive without efficient infrastructures that are competitive, and Europe has that competitiveness. We have to continue to invest there. We're talking about energy, logistics. Dunkirk has a port. It's got an electric network. It was created for several nuclear projects, and it can support such a gigafactory. And we're going to have to be able to accommodate 10,000 people. So all of this is part and parcel of the way in which we can consolidate ecosystems to retain our sovereignty. So let's not just look at it in terms of technology. It means that we have to build everything that goes with that to stabilize such factories and anchor them in our regions. Arnaud Aimé, let's investing in men and women and skills for the future. We see that there are some very strong opportunities that are opening up for jobs in the climate, for example, 100,000 in nuclear business, for example. So if the youngsters in France are well educated, they can be a source of hope. But by the same token, does our training system, what is our training system ready to train people? We currently have 35,000 graduates in engineering each year, but we're going to have to really multiply that number. Are we equipped for it? Because we need to do it now. So what is the kind of jolt that France needs to be on a par with what's at stake? Well, just to round off what you've just said, Philippe, you've mentioned innovations, disruptive innovations with technologies which enable us to decarbonize. We've talked about decarbonisation for the past 3 days. It's very important, but that's not the only thing that's important in life. There are other disruptive innovations. There's, for example, those that enable us to live better. There's artificial fooding. There's the vaccine revolution, semiconductors. Fabienne mentioned those earlier on, and Nicolas talked about these photonic chips that will be able to raise the electronic chips. So there's a whole palette of opportunities to decarbonize. For the France 2030 plan, which covers some of those subjects, and which is driven by the BPI and the CDS, well, it's a great plan, of course, but we need people to actually deploy that plan. So I met Dufour at the bar the other day, and he said, you've really got to talk with your gut, talk from the gut. So I was trained as an engineer, and so I'm preaching for my parish and for the scientific community. Today, I think that in terms of national education for science, then France is not an emerging country, it's an emerging country. It's a bit of a catastrophe. When you take a look at the PISA rankings of those OECD countries in terms of the level of the students in math, then France has just fallen flat on its face. In 2000, it was in 11th position, and over 15 years, it's been hovering around the 25th place. Today, we are lacking in scientists. There was the MP Valérie Rambaud who was talking the day before yesterday about that here, saying in Germany, there are 20% of students in Germany which are studying science or technology, whereas in France, that's 25% less than that. So in France, we obviously need 3 times more engineers and PhD students than there are today. But for this, we're going to have to attract high school students to scientific subjects, but things aren't looking very good on that score. Bruno Le Maire yesterday was saying that we need to put science at the heart of society. Today, science is not at the heart of society. There is a common kind of foundation of education, and then the 11 hours of literature, French, languages, and also geography and history. There are 2 hours of sports, and in those 2 hours, there's 2 hours of scientific teaching. It's a kind of hodgepodge of math, science, and biology. I think France really needs to, put itself together. So yes, you really need to give a kick up the backside to the national education system. Yeah, we need to focus on our maths teachers. So we need to give cookery classes at middle school, because you need to be able to read recipes. It's maths because you have to know proportions, and it's physics and chemistry because you have to need the interaction for baking and cooking. It's history and geography. So there's a suggestion I'm putting to you. If we teach children about maths differently, they may be more interested and find more pleasure. Yeah, you have to find the right teachers. And they could also be eating better for less. You ought to have good teachers for that as well. So when you're in high school, you have to give the pupils inspiration, particularly the girls there, because it's very it's gender-driven in France, sadly. We need more energy, so we need to go where there is potential, and there is potential among the girls. So Fabien Versavo, we have hardly talked about AI yet this morning. So it's a very anxiogenic. I realize that. People are kind of scared about that, although I'm not scared about AI. People are very frightened about the question of AI. So the question is, does the human being have a future if machines can demonstrate that they are superior? You yourself have experience in the Asiatic world, and you say that AI is galloping there. What's going to happen? Of course, it's going to impact the workplace. That is already the case of those who are using generative AI. And yesterday there was a press conference. You can read this in the newspaper, my newspaper, Le Tribune. Bruno Le Maire said that it will only take 5 years for us to catch up our delay in generative AI. What do you think about that?
As regards risks and dangers associated with generative AI, there's a kind of consensus whereby those risks exist. Of course, the media and the social networks have spawned fears, and they tend to overstep the mark. There's a bit of marketing, so they haven't gauged the right level of risks. So we underestimate our ability to keep control of our destiny. So it's an apocalyptic view, and it won't be forthcoming. If we want AI to emerge fully and reap the benefits in Europe, Europe should set the conditions for regulations that will help innovators. What our minister said is clear. It's an objective and ambitious target. I don't know if it will be achieved. It will depend on the decisions that will be made in the months to come. In Europe, in the United States, there's a kind of a consensus in order to create the conditions for a launch of generative AI. It's important to protect the creators, the rights holders. There's a consensus on that, so we need to go for it. We need to focus on the content, the interactions between AI and a citizen. So this should be well managed, but there are differences in Europe. The European Parliament presented draft legislation. It goes too far because innovation through regulation. I don't think that we've came up with the right approach. We've come up with the right approach. When you want to regulate systemic risks in financial industries, in traditional industries, yes, the Italian boss said when there's an innovation, the Chinese will copy this innovation and the Europeans will regulate the innovation. It's a kind of stereotype. Of course, you need to take into account the forthcoming elections. And people raised the stakes instead of creating a legislative framework with lots of details, with lots of detail elements. These are risks that we infer, but let us use the innovators, the methods of startups, and then the legislator will implement a light structure whereby it's possible to control the use cases that emerge. They have to comply with the European values and the fundamental rights of our law. And on a case-by-case basis, the companies that go adrift should be regulated. So this is a project, a draft from the European Parliament. The Commission and the Council will take on that topic, and they will be pragmatic, something that we've seen already in the past with other projects. OpenAI. So OpenAI, they want to open their offices in Europe, certainly in London. There are lots of legal uncertainties, and this may play a part. We are international companies, but we are in Europe with lots of subsidiaries in France. So our companies have to incur compliance-related costs that are colossal, between 15 and 25% of our investment capabilities in technology. The development teams, the data science teams have been working on compliance with standards. We have 10 minutes left. So if you have some questions, don't hesitate, raise your hands. I think that there's a roving mic. So let us start with you. You were the first. You were the first. So go ahead. Let us adopt democratic approach. So good morning to all of you. Who you are, can you introduce yourself, and who are you going to put the question to? I mean, just a question and not a long observation. Jacinda Well, the founder of a company based in Aix-en-Provence, Optimum Tracker. We make solar trackers, and we are using sunflower. We'll put the trackers on the sunflowers. When we created this company, we wanted to create a factory. We work for a future, but we haven't yet invested in the future. I was in China recently, and in China, the level of competitiveness is unprecedented. The Chinese are way ahead of us. Question for Nicolas and Thierry. How can we convince our customers to buy French products and maybe to pay more, 1 or 2, 3% more? Very good question. So I know him very well. So Yassine created his own company, a French entrepreneur, an outstanding French entrepreneur. So lots of ups and downs. So BPI supported Optimum Tracker. Of course, this is a question that could be raised in the drugs industry, not only in the photovoltaic business. So we have to make sure that there's a higher price if you want to relocate, but these are not huge amounts of money in the drugs business. 0.01 cents in terms of price increase if you want to relocate a paracetamol plant to Roussillon. The purchasing center should accept this derisory amount of money, 0.005. So for photovoltaic business, you need to take into account the major players. They want to get the lowest possible prices and rates. And they said recently that they didn't believe in the relocation of a photovoltaic plant. That's not a good idea. We need to relocate plants, photovoltaic plants, to France and Europe. So have a look at the Chinese entrepreneurs. Chinese entrepreneurs have said that they will make and produce photovoltaic panels in Europe, so things will go better. And what about carbon? The carbon project. We support this project, 1.5 billion worth of investments with 3,000 jobs. But what about the private counterpart? It has still to be sought. When we invest, there's a co-investor or 2 co-investors. So, and with credit, we need to rely on a bank. We can't fend for ourselves. We need a private counterpart. Okay, right. Another question. Good morning to all of you. Pierre Arbogo. I'm a student at the Higher School of Paris in cognitive science. So I'm part of a movement, Mindsetters movement. A question for Mr. Deo. How can we convince private companies to invest in equal opportunities in terms of education and access to funding? A very good question. It's a complex question. I do agree with my colleague, with my neighbor. Education, science education is in a dilapidated condition. There are some exceptions. I'm surprised by the reform of high schools, vocational high schools. Of course, we have engineers, but we will need more foremen, more specialized workers than engineers. But when this reform was done, there were some discussions with the green industry players. So it's important to have an holistic approach instead of allowing the national education, doing its own bit. For example, they didn't want to publish the results of the people who graduated. So it's like asking a company not to publish its results, but things have changed. Of course, we have a system based on equal opportunities, but climbing up the career ladder is not easy nonetheless, even though there are some measures that are being drawn up. These are drops in the ocean, but there's an order degree whereby people can get some financial support for preparatory schools. So there should be a better balance between schools in Paris and schools in the provincial cities. So there is an array of measures. Most engineering schools will go to and are going to high schools to canvass potential candidates in high schools. So there are lots of actions. So it's a matter of taking different types of actions. We invest in equality, in equal opportunities with lots of measures. We give grants. We have some support scheme, but we need to scale up. I think that everybody should be involved. So equal opportunities, I mean, this is a topic that is of critical importance. Allow me to chip in. So I will be like a services engineer. So science education is very difficult to reproduce socially. Science, maths, biology, they are taught at schools with teachers much more than soft sciences. Affluent families, they will buy specific maths questions or lessons rather. That's not the case in geography or history. So to boost science and scientific courses, this is very good for equal opportunities. There's nothing better, to say the least. I do concur with what has been said. So schools should be less vertical in terms of know-how. Experimentation should be beefed up. People should be able to innovate scientifically with some autonomy. Of course, more female workers will be able to decrease tensions, and we have to be attractive from an international viewpoint. Europe should be in a position to fetch the best people. So we need to reconcile training programs and the links with schools. I think that the best people in our country shouldn't go elsewhere, shouldn't go to other countries. Another question? I will be shorter. Valérie de la Malazelier, I'm working in the energy business. There's a sector that you haven't touched upon, the war on standards, on technical references, technical repositories. So the Americans, they support the international standards. So there's a decoupling of technologies. In France, we don't want to draft those global repositories. Okay, what do you think of that? Another question, please. Second question. A short question. So I'm working in the renewable energy business with batteries. Mr. Deo, you found individual companies. When we are together, it's better. So there should be a virtual approach whereby these companies can work together with their integrated value chains. Otherwise, they will be gobbled up by big companies. Very last question, and then we will provide you with an answer. A question about education. Of course, we can hope that the state can do better, more agile, but civil society companies could invest more. You are very liberals, but you've said that it's up to the state, to chip in. So I will start, and then the financiers will provide an answer. Regarding education, I don't think that a philanthropic approach is necessary. There's not a problem of education to geography, to languages, to history in France. So in France, the problem is science education. The foundations are being supported by the state with a tax regime. Why not give tax incentives for scientific education through projects and scientific training? BPI per sector, what do you think of that? I think it's there's an elephant in the room. So the social networks have a bad impact on the brains of our children. When I talk to the students in high schools in the suburbs, I ask them, what kind of network do you use? And it changes all the time. 3 months ago, they told me, we are on the social network 30 minutes per hour. When you're 15, 16, or 17, you end up with a mind that is quite confused. It's a source of concerns, and the Chinese are using other networks. Their networks are well regulated. You are talking about psychological damage. Bear witness the riots. So when you have an industrial development, it's important to have some means in order to wage a battle on standards in Brussels. So you need to wage a battle on market niches. Otherwise, you will destroy some value at the expense of those who've made some efforts. Regarding the batteries, the operating model of the BPI is based on the entrepreneur. And let's face it, the mystic of the entrepreneur, free, lucky luck, bold, courageous, so the entrepreneur will be supported. Regarding equity, we will help a determined and optimistic person. So what you've said is really interesting, but we need to take into account the coordination costs, governance that is complex, counterparts that are difficult to get by for us investors. So I'm not really optimistic. Thanks a lot, and a big round of applause to them. It was a very insightful debate.